Hello. So recently it's come to my attention that a lot of people don't know a lot more about Egypt other than the fact that it's a really old country with pointy buildings, golden kings, and emoji writing. And that's fine. But with the release of Assassin's Creed Origins, I thought it would be worth putting a little information out there just for information's sake, so when you play the game, you have all the context. I'm going to start at the very beginning. From the beginning of human development, Egypt had a kickstart to civilization thanks to the fertile lands of the River Nile. Egypt also lucked out by the desert's arid temperatures, which prevented decay and led to some of the best quality archaeological evidence in the world, such as tools and human remains. Despite the evidence, we don't have a lot of information about what was happening until around 5000 BCE, when certain tribes become pretty pronounced. As of 3150 BCE, Egypt was divided in two: Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. They pretty much functioned as two separate countries, each with their own crown and ruler, and Upper Egypt was getting more and more martial and militaristic. Eventually, Upper Egypt went and conquered the north and formed a new crown. This is documented in a stone called the Narmer Palette, which dates to around the same time when this guy, Narmer, takes the credit. Memphis was founded in 3000 BCE. The creation of a city in the Lower Egyptian Delta pretty much solidified Upper Egypt's control over Lower Egypt and kick-started what we call the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is when we start to see the development of culture, funerary practices, and of course, the pyramids. It's also the time that Ra became crazy important in Egyptian religion, as he was directly associated with the pharaoh and therefore became the head of what would become the Egyptian pantheon. There were literally hundreds of other gods and goddesses at the time, including Hathor, Anubis, and Isis towards the end of the Old Kingdom. During this time, kings of Egypt became known as the mediators between the people and the gods, and a manifestation of the god Horus. The pharaoh's job was essentially contact with the gods through various daily rituals in order to prevent disasters and therefore keep Egypt safe. This job didn't finish at death. He was believed to continue to rule from the afterlife and watch over them. This is partially the reason for the beginning of the practice of mummification, and one of the reasons they built the pyramids. It took them a few goes though, like a lot of failures before they finally got it right. Still, you have to give them points for determination. The belief that the pharaoh was the only one able to talk to the gods and protect Egypt was pretty much the reason for the decline of the Old Kingdom. When Pepi II became pharaoh, he was only 6 years old, too young to adequately perform the complex rituals required of him, and local rulers questioned his authority. This started the period of conflict known as the First Intermediate Period, when Egypt was broken up into sections and rulers fought each other for control. Eventually, one ruler won and took over. This guy was known as Mentuhotep II, and he ruled over a town called Thebes. Mentuhotep was an all-around great guy who, according to most records, single-handedly unified Egypt again and built a bunch of stuff, right up until he was probably murdered. Nonetheless, Mentuhotep began a new dynasty and started the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. The capital moved from Memphis to Thebes, and the new kingdom was something of a renaissance for ancient Egypt. As Thebes became the centre of government and commerce, the cult of Amun, which was based in Thebes, became more and more powerful. But Memphis was still pretty important. It was a centre of commerce and art and also housed the enormous Temple of Ptah. The Middle Kingdom is particularly known for the amazing building projects that were undertaken during this time, including monuments, irrigation systems, temples, and, you guessed it, pyramids. It's also the time known for, a bunch of wars, which Egypt was pretty successful in. The first female king, Sobekneferu, also reigned during the Middle Kingdom. She ruled for around 4 years and died suddenly with no heirs, but hey, we'll take it. Sobekneferu's death left a power vacuum, which eventually devolved into the Second Intermediate Period. There were a lot of wars during this time, mostly with Nubia, until eventually a number of victories resulted in the end of the wars and the beginning of the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom was a period of trade and expansion. This is also when the Medjay became a thing. The Medjay were originally mercenaries from Nubia who became known as a group of elite fighters who acted essentially as police until they very suddenly disappeared in the 20th dynasty. The New Kingdom is also pretty famous for this guy, who decided that pretty much all the other gods were bad and his god, Aten, was the best. This pissed off the pretty powerful cult of Amun priests. He began the cult of Aten, which was abolished pretty much as soon as he died. Tutankhamun took over, ruled for a bit, had a lot of health problems and died young, and with his death came the end of the New Kingdom. I'm going to rush ahead for a bit, A lot happened in this time. The main thing to note is that eventually Egypt was invaded by their long-time rivals, the Persians. The Persians ruled Egypt on and off for roughly 200 years, and those years were filled with rebellion after rebellion, right up until Egypt was taken from the Persians by Alexander the Great. What's important to note is that the Egyptians despised the concept of another country ruling over them. So, after Alexander took Gaza, he immediately went to the Siwa oasis which housed the Oracle of Amun. Alexander had them proclaim him as a son of Zeus Amun, a combination of the head of both Egyptian and Greek pantheons. This was an incredibly clever move, because it not only gave him the religious legitimacy he needed to be accepted in Egypt, but also simultaneously solidified his roots as a Greek ruler. Most importantly, it began an era of the mingling of Greek and Egyptian cultures that defined Ptolemaic Egypt. So Alexander takes over and frames his conquest as him liberating Egypt from the bonds of Persian tyranny. He also founds the city of Alexandria, one of many cities he founded and named Alexandria, by the way. The city was perfectly positioned to become a successful trade hub and became one of the most multicultural cities in the world at the time. In his typical Alexander style, Alexander moved on and put somebody else in charge of the country he'd just conquered. The person he put in charge was one of his generals, Ptolemy. Of course, Alexander died a couple of years later after leaving Egypt, and pretty soon the generals he'd left in charge of the various territories began to devolve into infighting. It doesn't take Ptolemy long to proclaim himself as Pharaoh, Ptolemy I Soter, which began a long line of Ptolemies known as the Ptolemaic era. The Ptolemies built an impressive empire, and all the while they maintained traditional Egyptian practices, including the practice of marrying your own sister, mimicking the myth of Amun and Isis. Ptolemy I commissioned the building of a huge tower to guide the many trade vessels coming and going from Alexandria port. It was created using interlocked stone bound together with molten lead and would stand for 1,000 years. The Ptolemies are also responsible for the construction of the Library of Alexandria, which was also commissioned by Ptolemy I. The library would go on to house over 400,000 original scrolls at its height, and only a fraction of what we have is left after it burnt down. I'm going to skip ahead again. A lot of wars happen, a lot of infighting and murder, and 300 years later, Cleopatra VII Philopator was born. Her rise to power was highlighted by conflict and political corruption, and she grew up learning how to play the game. Before Cleopatra became queen, the Ptolemaic era was in a period of decline. They had lost the territories of Cyprus and Cyrenaica, and the glory of the mid-Ptolemaic era was all but gone. Recognizing her potential, her father, Ptolemy VII Auletes, made Cleopatra his joint ruler, although with limited power. When her father died in the March of 51 BCE, he left her as joint monarch with her 10-year-old brother. She obviously had no intention of ruling by his side and promptly did everything she could to edge him out. This pissed off a lot of people, and her enemies eventually rallied and removed her from power. I'm going to stop there, as that's pretty much the starting point of Assassin's Creed. Well done, you just listened to the entire history of ancient Egypt, and you're basically up to date. Well, kinda.